can't repay you. You will be rewarded at the resurrection of the just. I have some folks here this morning from St. Mark's Plainfield, I should say. They have been threatening to come and see me for a long time. And now that it's my last Sunday, they finally. But it's an absolute joy to see them. Will you stand up and let the others know? Mr. Tinley will do the formal introductions. But they will know the story I'm about to tell you. Oh, this must have been around 1983, 84. We were at St. Thomas in Red Bank searching for an organist because we'd lost our organist. And we had put an ad in the organist journal, and I was blown away when I got in the mail a resume that thick from a musician who had composed several masses, composed several classical pieces, and he had conducted the Berlin Symphony. I said, we can't employ this guy. We don't have that kind of money. But he called and he said, I'm desperate for work. He actually came and we talked. And he said, look, I'm from Romania and I have defected to the US. Romania was communist at the time. And I'm desperate for a job. But we were in the middle of our rebuilding program and we really didn't have any more money to give him. But St. Mark's was looking for an organist. And so I called Father Lyons and I said, can you use this guy? Father Lyons snapped him up like that. And he was there for about, 5 years, 4 years, something like that. Until another church heard about him and snapped him up, stole him from St. Mark. Well, he was an absolutely wonderful musician. And he tried to teach my daughters the piano. They weren't interested. And he said, I'll teach you. And he had even less success with me. But he told many stories. As we would sit at the piano, he would tell me these stories. And one of them has stuck in my mind. He said it's the story about the first class he attended in how to be a conductor. He said the professor had assembled a small orchestra, and he had the orchestra play a piece of music, and then he said to the class, what do you think? Was the music played correctly? And he said he put his hand up and said, yes, it was. I'm familiar with the music and so on. Then the professor pointed out that 3 instruments in the back had not played at all. And they were in shock because it all sounded so good. And then the teacher made his point. He said, the first rule of conducting is to listen for what is missing. Listen for what is missing. And he said he'd never forgotten that. I tell you that story because it's kind of a good little analogy to help us understand what Jesus is saying in our text. I suppose he would say, if you want to know whether you're a genuine Christian community or not, ask who is missing. Who is missing? I think we would congregations would be highly offended to be told that we are not open, welcoming, friendly. We know we have to be like that, right? We know that's how to attract new members. We may even be familiar with the theory that says, you already know the people who are going to join your church in the next 3 to 5 years. They're coming as visitors. They're checking you out. So we understand that we have to be welcoming. The problem is that we in the church are welcoming if people are like us in dress, in education, in general background, and so on. So let's not get uptight about this. This is a real issue. We would not be quite so welcoming to a raggedy homeless person, or someone obviously spaced out on drugs, some destitute person. I know we're thinking, well, of course we would. No, we wouldn't. And I'll tell you that I have had some experience with this. Like a member coming up to me in the early 80s when dreadlocks were not that, fashionable, and say, that young man should not be an usher wearing dreadlocks. And this is a young man who came to church every Sunday. But the fact that he was a committed member was less important than the fact that he had dreadlocks, and this guy didn't like it. Little clues to what, there are limits to who we would welcome. That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at. And that is something that we have to address. It also makes us realize how radical, truly radical, is Jesus' idea of what the church is. And it makes us realize how far we are from being that church. There are limits to who we want to see in the seat beside us. When we started the soup kitchen over in St. Thomas, Red Bank, some homeless people began to come to the soup kitchen, and a couple of them came to church. Man, a few saints went and shook their hands, kind of like that, and most people just at coffee hour, sat where they normally sit and kind of ignored them. So these are little clues to what I'm talking about. Wasn't so in the early church. In the early church, literally everyone was welcome. Slaves, slave owners, women, men, rich, poor, you name it. St. Paul famously said, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, and if he lived today with him black or white, straight or gay, yeah. So, I was thinking as I was writing the sermon, somebody might get up in the congregation and say, well, what about the terrorists? Like the one who went into the church in South Carolina and shot the people. Well, I have to tell you that the New Testament addresses that. They had to deal with a terrorist named Paul, who was out to get the Christians. So, we don't have an excuse as far as that's concerned. That's the risk we have to take in being welcoming to everybody. No, the early church welcomed everyone. And that was one of the things that made it enormously attractive to people, especially people who were considered social outcasts. Everybody felt they could come and be part of this incredible community that was following Jesus. Often we are much more interested in our image. And that tells me that we are more interested in fitting ourselves to the value systems of the world than fitting ourselves to the value system of Christ. So you, as a congregation, cannot place restrictions on who walks through those doors. You cannot do it. The moment you say this group or that group cannot come, you have stopped being the church, you have become some kind of club. You've become a club. You know? So this is an important thing Jesus is telling us. Who is missing? And why are they missing? You know, in the early 80s, before I went to Red Bank, I was in Brooklyn, and I used to supply the church in Brooklyn that used to be predominantly white, and the neighborhood had changed. Blacks, Hispanics were now the majority. But this church steadfastly refused to welcome those people in. And as a result, that church was dying. One Sunday when I went, I saw the senior warden at the door looking quite anxious. I looked at my watch and said, "I'm not late, am I?" He said, "No, I'm not. I'm not looking for you. I'm looking to make sure we get enough members in today so we can pay you." That's how desperate they were. They were dying and they knew it. They would not welcome anyone from the neighborhood. So this has very practical effects when you refuse to welcome people. You know, if you're a communal church where most of the members don't live in the neighborhood anymore, but they commute in, you're dying because you're not engaging the people where you live, the people in your neighborhood. You see? So this is powerful stuff. I got a couple of stories for you. I may have three. It's not last Sunday, it was dangerous. The current presiding bishop, Michael Curry, tells a story about his parish in Baltimore. He had an inner city parish, and there were gangs and, you know, all the things we associate with the inner cities. And he said his Sunday school teachers came to him and said, "We have some children from the neighborhood in the Sunday school. They are extremely disruptive. They talk back to the teachers, they won't do what they're told, they fight with the other kids. You got to get them out of here, Father. And he said to them, well, we can either wrestle with them now, deal with them now, or deal with them later when they're part of a gang, and they're mugging you while you're coming out of a church meeting. You see what I'm saying? It's not easy. It's not easy. But we have to engage. We have to engage everybody. Second story, slightly lighter note. Bishop J. Walker, who was the first African-American bishop in the Diocese of Long Island, said when he was a parish priest out west, he used to say to his senior warden, you know, we need about 50 more members to make this congregation really viable. And they would sit and plan and strategize about how to accomplish that. But they never were able to do so. He said he would pray to God, you know, help us figure out how to get the additional members we need. Well, God answered his prayer, he said, but in a way that he didn't expect. The state closed the mental health facility up the road, and about 50 members came. Then he had to go back to God and say, Lord, now listen. When I prayed for 50 members, I didn't pray for 50 crazy members. But they had to deal with that situation, he said. And you know my old joke about the guy who wanted to join this church so badly. Went up to the preacher after church one day and said, I would really like to join this church. And the preacher looked at him, he smelled, he did, you know, it was very scruffy. And not to put him off too badly, too harshly, he said, well, why don't you pray on it and come back next Sunday and tell me what the Lord said to you? Well, he never saw the guy again. Till about a year later, he saw the guy, and he said, well, aren't you the guy who had said you wanted to join my church? He said, yes, Pastor, I am. Did you pray about this matter? He said, yes, I prayed. And what did God say to you? He said, Jesus said, I myself have been trying to get into that church for the longest while, and I haven't succeeded yet. So don't worry about it. I'll join something else. Brothers and sisters, it matters the kind of church we are. The biggest problem in the world is people's inability to get along with one another. You know? And if we can model a different kind of community where we're willing to work at this challenge of putting everybody together and struggling with the issues of community, we would be doing the world an enormous service. So it matters what kind of congregation we are. It's not, you know, it's not about being the kind of congregation that makes us feel comfortable. It's not about feeling comfortable. So what I'm saying is that when you look at the disparity between what Jesus intends the church to be and what we are, we begin to realize that we have to fight to become that kind of church. And it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a struggle. It's not going to be easy. And so as I leave you, I want to leave you with that thought. Always think about the kind of congregation you are. Always think in terms of who might we be welcoming that we're not welcoming. Always think in terms of who is missing. It makes an enormous difference to the church and to the world that we should struggle to become the kind of congregation, the kind of church Christ intended us